Holy crap, this is going to be the shortest episode in the history of the podcast. Alright everyone, hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host KiramidHead, and I'm bringing you another solo episode, and today, because the new Godzilla movie King of the Monsters is going to be out in just over a week, I believe, I decided I was going to cover the other Godzilla script I had in my file, and that is Godzilla King of the Monsters by Fred Dekker, which was based on a story by Steve Miner. Now, the story behind this one is that it was going to be made in the early 80s by Steve Miner, who was just off of doing Friday the 13th 3D. And he wanted it to be he wanted to use like the 3D technology on this as well, but the whole thing ended up falling apart. Now, before I get into the episode proper, I'm going to do my usual plugs along with a couple of new things. So first off, I just want to get out of the way. It's already almost over, and I procrastinated on this episode too much just to really make a huge difference. But I had a couple of t-shirt campaigns put together with Bonfire, and if you want to check them out now before, the campaign just ends without anybody buying any, unfortunately, because I guess I'm just terrible at, the social media thing. But the links are bonfire.com/screenplay-archaeology-1 if you want the Pimp Head shirt, the Hellraiser shirt, and bonfire.com/screenplay-archaeology-Muldoon if you want the Maybe the Raptors Moved Muldoon shirt, which is based on a line I did in the Jurassic Park 4 episode last year. So if you're interested in buying the show and maybe potentially helping the show out, go check that out. And also, I'm not terribly serious about this, but I did put together a Patreon page just because there was only a few hours left before the new Patreon rules went into effect where they would take a bigger cut of your money. So I put a Patreon page together at patreon.com/screenplayarchaeology. So go, if you really want to go there, do it. It's not something you have to do. I'm encouraging the t-shirts more than that just because I don't want those campaigns to be complete failures. But I mean, you can go to the Patreon and donate if you feel like it. There's no pressure. But there's that. But to do the usual plugs now, if you want to check out another podcast on the same subject matter, check out the Shelved Podcast. He just put out a new script episode earlier this week. Very good stuff. Definitely give that a listen. And also remember, if you have any questions, contact us at screenplayarchaeology@outlook.com. That email address is down below, and we'll always be open to questions. We also have social media pages at facebook.com/screenplayarchaeology, as well as tumblr.com, screenplayarchaeology.tumblr.com, I think is what it's called. Just search Screenplay Archaeology on Tumblr if you even still use Tumblr. And we have Screenplay Archaeology also on Twitter, so search that up there as well. So check all those out if you want to. We're also on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, and if you feel so inclined, give us a rating and a review on iTunes. I will read it out on the show if I can remember to do so, because I like reading out iTunes reviews, because I just find it fun. So yeah, with all that out of the way, let's just get into the whole subject matter of this. Now, the overall storyline of this script is that it's set in the 80s during the Cold War, and there's a nuclear satellite. There's a satellite armed with nuclear missiles orbiting the Earth and gets hit by a stray meteorite, and one of the missiles launches on accident and crashes into the Pacific Ocean, and it's it hits away from people, so everyone's thinking that's okay, but it cracks open the bottom of the ocean, and out comes Godzilla. And the plot follows essentially two groups of people. You have reporter Dana Martin, who's tracking these incidents of monster sightings, and then you have Colonel Daxton, who's this military guy who's also kind of a spy character with an eye patch. And he's sort of feuding with his Russian enemy Khrushchev, and he's dealing with this Russian sub that was sunk, and he's retrieving these special missiles, and it all revolves around Godzilla, and everything comes to a head when Godzilla pops up in San Francisco. Now, as far as the background on this one goes, I kind of covered it already, and First off, I'm a big Godzilla fan, but I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the Godzilla movies here, because frankly, we'll be here all day if I do that. But I do really enjoy them for the most part. Even like the crazy ones are fun to watch just because of how crazy they are. But I do find Godzilla movies to be very enjoyable, and I am very much looking forward to King of the Monsters. Now, this script, I'm going off of a third draft. There's one you can find more commonly online, which is a first draft, which still has King of the Monsters 3D as the title. This one is just Godzilla King of the Monsters, and so I'm going off of a third draft, and the background is essentially that Steve Miner was coming off of some success on Friday the 13th, and so he decided he wanted to go try and do a Hollywood Godzilla movie, and he approached Toho, and they signed off on it. He hired Fred Decker to write a screenplay, and he hired a bunch of people, including David Allen to do stop motion effects, and Rick Baker to make a full-size Godzilla head, but that was never created, so that would have been really interesting to see at any rate. And all this stuff was being done. You had William Stout doing storyboards and production design. Really interesting, Godzilla design. If you're watching this on YouTube, this should be the thumbnail, is that design. Very, very cool looking. So yeah, he put this together as like a passion project, essentially. And Fred Decker, who was hired on, I believe he said this was his first writing job ever in an interview. And he, of course, went on to write and direct Night of the Creeps and The Monster Squad. And he also did... Let's not forget he did RoboCop 3, which I still haven't seen, and recently he did The Predator with Shane Black, which I don't hate anywhere near as much as most people do. I have plenty of problems with it, namely that third act. I enjoy it okay, but I'm not going to go into any detail on that, because the last time I said anything about that, I had people in the comments on YouTube chewing me out when I did that Predators episode, so I'm just going to leave it be. But yeah, Fred Decker is a guy I generally like as a writer. I like that unproduced script he did with Shane Black called Shadow Company. He also did a Johnny Quest script, which I thought was really good. But yeah, this script, he said he approached it as, because he hadn't seen any of the Godzilla films all the way through, so he decided he was going to write it as kind of like an action-adventure movie with Godzilla in it, so it could be a movie that would be interesting even without the monster. And I think that's an interesting approach. Now, I'm going to jump into the script. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's kind of like Gorgo in a sense, but it's also kind of, it's hard to describe. It's kind of like it has a lot in common with the movie that Toho eventually made, Godzilla, Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 1985. Quite a few plot similarities with that in a few places, which I think would be interesting to point out. But looking at my notes, I'm just going to start from the beginning. Once again, this is a third draft. After they dropped the 3D, I believe it was one of the ploys to get the budget down. But so, it opens with a NATO defense satellite that's armed with nuclear missiles. It gets hit by a meteorite during a test. It launches one of the missiles at Earth, and it crashes into the Pacific Ocean. And so the people in the control room, they breathe a sigh of relief, because it's like, okay, it's crashed away from people, so that means nobody really got affected by this. But the camera goes down to the ocean floor, where a fissure opens up and a clawed reptilian hand emerges. And that's just an immediately gripping opening image. I like that a lot. And so it cuts to San Francisco, where we meet reporter Dana Martin, and she's talking to a friend of hers named Judy, whom, if I remember the first draft, because it's been a while since I've read the first draft, she had a bit of a bigger role there. And Dana Martin, of course, was named after Steve Martin, the Raymond Burr character in the Americanized version of the original film. And apparently they were looking at maybe getting Demi Moore to play this character, which would have been interesting in the early 80s. But she's wanting to cover more serious stories, like Veronica and Anchorman kind of. And she wrote an article that linked a disappeared Japanese cargo freighter with sightings of a sea monster off Guatemala. And this gets her in trouble with her editor, but she gets a tip that the missing ship is now getting towed down to harbor, and she goes to check it out. And there's this kind of a funny moment where she tries to pose as an insurance investigator to get past the Coast Guard recruit who's keeping her from checking out the charred, blackened ship. And this is a really kind of eerie scene the way it's written, because the fog has moved in over the harbor and you can't really see much. I can imagine this being very cool depending on how it's directed. And so she walks off into the fog and pretends to get mugged, and the guard runs off to try and find the purse snatcher. And this guy named Tony plays a role later on in the script, and if I remember right, the first draft he was in it quite a bit more and was a bit of a different character too. But once again, it's been a while since I've read that. So she climbs aboard the ship and she finds a trilobite on the deck before Tony returns and catches her. And a trilobite is this prehistoric creature which predates the dinosaurs and all that, and they find one in Godzilla's footprint in the original movie, which so I believe this is a reference to that. And that's when a Japanese sailor covered in radiation burns lurches out of the shadows muttering something about Gojira. And this is a thing which is very similar to Godzilla 1985, is that in that movie you had the nuclear missile launched from space, although it was a bit different in how it was used. And there was also a Japanese ship where, they find a creature on board, and that was like a mutated sea louse. And then there was like dead guys on the ship and all that. So it reminds me of that a little bit. Interesting. I wonder if Toho saw this script and went, like that, and just put that into their movie. Because the way this is written, it feels very similar to what that movie would do. Although that movie, of course, was different because it's Japan doing their take on the Cold War, and this is very much an American take on that. And so it cuts to the Pacific Ocean, and specifically somewhere off Mexico, and we see a group of Russian frogmen who are led by a guy named Boris Khrushchev, who's kind of the villain of this, but he kind of fades in and out of it a little. They emerge from the ocean, and they kill the crew of a small fishing boat, and then Khrushchev observes some nearby naval vessels, and they're taking part in a salvage operation, checking the wreckage of a Soviet nuclear submarine, which Khrushchev has a line asking if there were any other survivors, and so the assumption is that they were on board the submarine. There's not like a scene of them on board the submarine, but that's the idea. And so, the salvage operation, it's under the leadership of the eye patch-wearing Colonel Peter Daxton, who leads a crew of divers aboard the wreck. And this guy, apparently they looked at Powers Booth to play him, but reading this, I couldn't help but just picture Snake Plissken, even though Snake Plissken staying in the army and taking orders and stuff like that is kind of fucked up. But I was just picturing that character, just because, like, eye patch, Snake Plissken, got it. Now, he leads them aboard the wreck, and he orders one to get a tape player they find aboard the sub working so they can look for clues, and searches the rest with another. And they find the crew dead, and they've apparently died of like some sort of toxic gas. And there's a case with 2 missiles and room for a third. And as they're leaving, the videotape plays, but they're not really paying any attention to it. And there's this part where it shows a huge reptilian face look at the camera and then shriek, which is pretty creepy. And one thing I like about this script is that it has its humorous moments, but also is pretty dark too. Like, there's definitely a horror edge to what's going on here. And also the poison gas gets explained way later on. Like, I can't remember the exact, but there's a moment where they mentioned that like the submarine got like knocked around, like Freon got leaked into the CO2 scrubber, which means it got knocked around pretty badly, meaning, it got attacked by Godzilla, or something else we're about to find out about in a minute. But what's weird about this tape is that the tape comes back later, and like the audio part of it is used, but I don't think anybody ever actually watches the tape and sees the Godzilla face on it, which is a little weird. Like Daxton goes out of his way to go, hey, get that tape player working, and then he never checks the footage. And so Dana goes to meet with paleobiologist Gerald Ballinger, and she hears him lecture about his theory that dinosaur-like pre-Triassic creatures, which he calls protosaurs, they once existed, and they had internal atomic power generators that made them nearly invulnerable, which once again is kind of what they do in Godzilla 85 and also in 2014, the idea of the internal nuclear reactor and like Godzilla absorbing nuclear energy and stuff like that was something that was very much in that 80s movie, and they carried it on into the rest of the Heisei series and was part of the mythology they established for the new Legendary series. So it's interesting seeing this kind of synergy, all these different Godzilla versions sort of either independently coming up with the same ideas or drawing from each other. And so she shows him the trilobite, and he says it must be a reproduction since they've been extinct for 360 million years. And so they seem to hit it off, and they're having kind of an attraction and a flirtation, but then Ballinger has to he has to kind of leave her behind because he gets met by some government agents at his house, and they're led by a man named Charlie Honda, whom this guy has a really cool name, and he never is that important in this script. Like, he's just a guy named Charlie Honda who's in the background of a few scenes. And so it cuts away to Odo Island, where we have natives and U.S. Special Forces soldiers who they're walking around in a giant footprint, and we hear a monstrous scream as everything catches on fire. And this is specifically said to be in Tahiti somewhere, and it's a pretty horrific scene. Like, there's like natives like cradling like their dead relatives and stuff. Once again, another good horror scene. And so we get introduced to Daxton's son Kevin, who gets in trouble in school over his pet lizard Rover, who's kind of like a sight gag who wanders in and out of this. And he's 13, I think they say. And he gets bullied, but, Daxton picks him up at school to take him home to their houseboat before it goes too far. And also this scene, like, it's his Kevin's mother plays a plays a role in the first draft, and she in this script is just dead. Like, I want to say her and her like new husband, because in the first draft they're divorced. In this, Daxton's wife is dead, and I believe her new husband played a role in that as well. And it was like, that's one problem the first draft has that this doesn't, is that it was kind of busy with a lot of characters and multiple love triangles. And this very much streamlines that down and cuts it down to the bone, and I think makes for a stronger movie. And so they're followed by 2 cars, but it just turns out to be Charlie Honda and some other agents, and they have this thing where they like give like Daxton his mission briefing, and then like the paper, like they set it on fire and it like flares up like magnesium or something, and Kevin's like, he says he takes like something like, ooh, flame paper or something like that. I'm like, that's a bit dramatic. Very Mission Impossible of it. And so they want Daxton to take on a mission in Mexico, and Kevin ends up coming along. And so it turns out to be in Baja, California, and it's the same one Ballinger was recruited for, and Daxton brings Kevin along. He's like driving the Jeep, and the general in charge, Heller, is pretty upset about the fact that he brought his kid along with, but it never really has any consequences. And so they go to the beach, and they find a dead giant lizard, which is Godzilla, but it's described as being visibly a juvenile version, and so it's essentially the baby Godzilla, and it's dead. According to Ballinger, it appears to have died very recently. He clashes with a military scientist over his protosaur theory, and this guy's like, oh, it's totally ridiculous, and he thinks that the baby Godzilla must be an alien, which is pretty goddamn hilarious. Heller says, oh, it doesn't matter yet. We're towing the corpse to San Francisco for further study. And so Ballinger, there's a scene where he meets with Kevin on the beach later, and he tells him the Japanese legend of the Dragon King Godzilla, which is a cool little nod, because in the original movie, there's this thing about how the Islanders have this legend of a monster called Godzilla, and whether they've actually encountered the real Godzilla or if it just happens to match up with their mythology is never really clarified in the movie. But I like how it's done here. I think that's a pretty neat idea. There's a scene follows where the adult Godzilla, shrouded in fog, attacks an oil derrick. And, there's these 2 guards on duty, and there's this weird scene where, like, it's like an older guard and a younger guard, and the older guard doesn't like the younger guard's music and goes and chucks his boombox into the ocean, is ranting about what real music is, and the big Godzilla, like, comes up behind him while he's still ranting. Like, that's a comedic moment that doesn't quite play. But the scene of, like, Godzilla attacking this thing and you don't quite see it is pretty cool. And so the younger guard, he tries to trap and burn Godzilla by, like, spraying some of the oil around and trying to set it on fire, but he only ends up accidentally killing himself and dooming the derrick. But it seems like Godzilla is going to destroy it anyways, because it seems like it cuts to, like, a further angle, and you can hear a shriek, and it's maybe implied that he uses the atomic breath on it. I wasn't really clear on that, but Dana is then seen examining an article about the derrick attack after the fact. And so we're back in San Francisco. There's a diplomatic meeting with the Russian embassy is in progress, and they want to know what happened to the confiscated missiles. And we're shown Daxton has them locked away, and his experts, one of whom is this guy called Digger O'Rourke, who I only remembered his name because he's semi-important near the end. And his name is Digger O'Rourke. That's pretty memorable. And his experts are like, we don't know precisely what these missiles are. This is something we've never seen before, which I thought was... I like that these missiles are definitely something new, because that sets up for their purpose at the ending, essentially. And the diplomatic meeting itself is being spied upon by a man with a metal hand, Khrushchev. So yeah, Khrushchev has a metal hand which has like a retractable blade, which is just making me think of the fucking, what the fuck was the guy's name in Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, who's the Russian guy with the metal hand with a cigarette lighter in it, and then like Big Boss gets the hand in Phantom Pain, I think. He reminds me of that guy, only way more ridiculously cartoonishly evil. And there's a quick, kind of funny scene of Godzilla poking its head out of the water at the beach and nobody sees it, which I thought was kind of funny. And Kevin bonds with Beth, this girl from his class at the beginning who got upset with him because his little pet lizard destroyed his her diorama. And they're talking, and then these bullies show up and they're like, oh, you like magic and stuff? Well, get out of these handcuffs. And they like shove ice cream like all over his face, and then he actually gets out of the handcuffs and gets one over on the bullies, which I thought was pretty badass. And him being good at like escape artist stuff is important for later. That was a cool setup. So this is a pretty cool kid character, I think, for the most part. Like, I remember him being a little weirder in the first draft, but here he seems pretty cool. And so later we see that Dana has followed Ballinger to the warehouse facility where the dead baby is being kept. It's in the Embarcadero in San Francisco. He figures out that the monster is radioactive right as she tries to sneak in and get a peek at it. And then she tells him about the derrick, and he bursts in on Daxton in the middle of the diplomatic meeting where he hears about the missiles and figures it out. The sub was sunk by the baby, which was killed with the missing third missile, and that the adult must be responsible for the ship and derrick attacks and is on its way to San Francisco now. So this is where they say that, like, the Freon leaked into the CO2 scrubber and stuff like that. And then we get 2 drunken men on a sailboat who aren't far from the city. They have a close encounter of Godzilla's dorsal fins as the creature swims towards the Golden Gate Bridge, which I thought was pretty funny. It was a pretty cool scene. Like, it was very awe-inspiring, showing you the scale of Godzilla, but it was also kind of funny with the 2 drunk guys. And so Daxton and Kevin, they have an argument on the houseboat. He's saying, oh, Mom wouldn't treat me like this. And then Daxton says, you never even knew your mother. And so just to calm himself down, he steps out to have a smoke, which is when the Russians, they kidnap Kevin, and Daxton gets a call from Khrushchev, and this is where we learned that they have something of a shared history together, that they met in Berlin some time ago, and they wants to trade Kevin for the remaining missiles. And so Daxton hears a buoy in the background of the call and narrows their location down from that clue. And I think Charlie Honda shows up in this scene. Like, he shows up at the houseboat, and then, like, Daxton is, like, driving him around and stuff like that. So Ballinger is miserable, nobody believed his warning, but Dana convinces him to help find proof. Then it cuts to Kevin, whom Khrushchev is holding in this old bomb shelter near the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is where he managed to Daxton cut off his arm with a helicopter rotor, and I'm like, did he turn the helicopter on and chop his arm off with it, or did he pick up a helicopter rotor and physically chop off his arm? Like what happens in one of the I Am Legend drafts I haven't covered yet. That just sounds like a really cool action scene that we don't get to see. He says that he arranged for Daxton to lose his eye as payback. And so they tie Kevin to a chair and leave the room, but he manages to get out thanks to his skills in the stage magic. And so Dana and Ballinger, they head to a military intelligence building and take 2 guards prisoner so they can find the necessary evidence. Back in the bunker, let me check how long I've been recording for. Oh wow, not long at all. This is going to be really short. Back in the bunker, Kevin finds a flare gun with 2 rounds and a narrow shaft that leads to the surface thanks to Rover, who's still in his pocket. He fires one of the rounds up into the air, which Daxton, who's nearby and heads in that direction, he sees it. Kevin knocks out the guard at his door with the second flare, which is badass, and manages to climb out of the bunker, only to come face to face with the big Godzilla, who sees Rover in his pocket and is like, that was a good little humorous moment there, and who backs away into the ocean right before Khrushchev catches Kevin. So Khrushchev and his men, they see Godzilla emerge from the water and approach the Golden Gate Bridge, and they attempt to book it in a skiff. And so Daxton arrives and sees him get on the boat, which gets dashed to pieces in Godzilla's wake, and he's devastated, believing his son is dead. Now, he's not dead. Khrushchev and Kevin are still very much alive. I'm not sure what happened to them in between here and when they come back, because it's like 10, 15 pages till they show up again, and I don't think it's ever explained what happened. Or if it did, I missed it. We go back to Ballinger and Dana, and they watch the tape, and they hear the commotion on the bridge. She heads to her paper with the tape, and he heads for the bridge. Godzilla, Godzilla's not necessarily attacking the bridge, it's more acting out of curiosity. It's like picking up cars and looking at them, and then dropping them. And that's when military guys show up and cordon off the bridge and start firing tank rounds at Godzilla. And, Ballinger, who's there, is going, don't do that, you're just gonna piss it off. And he severely, smacks the bridge and severely damages it before turning towards the city. And it's not clear the way it's described at first, but apparently Godzilla completely breaks the bridge here. So yeah, this is like the third giant monster movie where the San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge just gets fucked up. I believe it does in I can't remember if it gets destroyed in the Elliott and Rossio script or not, but it does in Pacific Rim and it does in 2014. Then Godzilla stomps into San Francisco, destroying lots of buildings and killing countless people, and the military attempts to fight it with everything. They have anti-aircraft missiles and all sorts of things, and they have 2 jet planes firing sidewinders at Godzilla, and Godzilla knocks one out of the air by picking up a streetcar and using it as a baseball bat. And it actually crashes into the San Francisco Chronicle, the newspaper building where Dana's at, and we'll get back to that in a minute. And then Daxton meets up with Ballinger, and they decide they have to try the special missiles. That's the only thing they think they can maybe kill Godzilla because it killed the baby. And Daxton takes their plan to Heller. So, declare a ceasefire for 2 minutes so we can lure Godzilla out of the city and fire one of the missiles down its throat from a helicopter. Heller tries to argue with him, but Daxton intimidates the general to going along. What he does is he rips his hat off his head, shoots a bunch of holes in it, then hands the hat back and says, next time I'll leave your head in it. But after they walk away, as soon as they're gone, Heller decides not to go ahead with the ceasefire just to be a dick, which is what I've written in my notes here. So Ballinger, he heads for the intelligence building to grab the tape player and then goes to get Dana, who's trapped inside, the newspaper office. And she watches her friend Judy die. Now, if I'm remembering the first draft right, there was this whole, romantic subplot where there was Dana and Ballinger, but Tony showed up and also had a thing for Dana, and then Judy had a thing for Tony, and it was all kind of complicated. I'm like, you didn't really need this in here, but this version gets rid of that. And, it streamlines things quite a bit and makes it a stronger movie. So, okay, she goes into the crash jet cockpit, pulls the dead guy out of it, then uses the ejector seat to get out of the hole in the roof. And so she meets Ballinger on the street. They kiss, and she produces the tape, which is part of their plan. I'm going to summarize their plan now. Basically, the idea is they're going to play the audio of the baby making noises to try and lure the adult out of the city so that they can safely fire the missile at it. And also, I should mention, all this carnage here, all these carnage scenes, there's a lot of really good storyboards out there on the web. I'm going to put one of them, as well as a picture of a diorama, I think it was, which used a model based on these Godzilla designs as its basis, just to show you the idea of what Godzilla would have looked like. Really, there's some really good, but basically William Stout's storyboards are really, really good, and I recommend you check them out. But two of them are going to be, one of the storyboards and that diorama are going to be the YouTube thumbnail. So definitely look at more of those if you're interested. It looks more kind of like a traditional T-Rex with some Godzilla fins on it, but it's an interesting kind of mishmash of the two. I think for what this movie was doing, it might have worked. Okay, so where am I on my notes again? Okay, Daxton is busy getting everything together for the helicopter flight when Khrushchev appears, his knife hand at Kevin's throat, demanding the helicopter and the missiles. So he just walked into a military base completely unseen. And he gets on the helicopter. He has the U.S. helicopter pilot as a hostage, and he tries to take Kevin with him, but Kevin knees him in the groin and gets away. So once again, Kevin is a badass. And so Daxton says, "Kevin, it's dangerous. Stay here." And he grabs onto the helicopter's landing strut and climbs in as it flies away. And he fights with Khrushchev in midair, and there's actually this tense moment where he's hanging out the side of the helicopter and Khrushchev is going to cut his other eye out. It's a pretty good fight scene. But eventually the helicopter flies too close to Godzilla and is forced to sharp bankly to one side, and Khrushchev falls out into the monster's claw, who looks at him and then unleashes its atomic breath, killing him. And this is the first time we really see that. And it's a little weird that it just decides to do it to this random guy instead of, doing it for the emotional moment that's coming up in a couple minutes. But yeah, that's that. But it's still kind of a cool moment. And one of the missiles gets lost during the fight. It falls out. It says it falls and starts leaking gas. And I'm like, a nuclear missile falls into the middle of the city and starts leaking gas. And no one is we never come back to that. No one ever talks about it. I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's such a good thing to ignore, guys. But the helicopter crashes and Godzilla destroys the Transamerica Pyramid building. And so Dana and Ballinger approach Tony and they give the pilot a boat for them. And he also apparently was a former AV guy or something, so he knows how to wire up the sound to broadcast the tape. And so Daxton crawls from the wreckage, grabbing the last missile and getting a ride back to the base, threatening this guy to he's going to shove a nuclear missile up his ass if he doesn't do it, which is pretty funny. Ballinger, Dana, and Tony take the boat to Alcatraz Island, where they wire the tape player to broadcast the baby's cries and lure Godzilla away from the city. And they're in the middle of doing this when Godzilla gets the Embarcadero and starts ripping the tops off of warehouses and discovers the baby's corpse. And there's a moment where you see the emotion on this critter's face reacting to the baby being dead, and then it just gets angry and enraged and starts shooting off its atomic breath weapon. This would have been a cool moment to maybe have the fight go a bit differently and have them be fighting at the warehouse, and it rips off the roof and sees them in there and then just looks over at the Russian guy and just blasts him. That would probably be a better, but it's still pretty cool the way it's done, but I just think that would be a better dramatic moment. And I should mention the giant monster looking for its baby is more akin to Gorgo, the British kaiju movie, than it is to Godzilla. But I think it's an interesting idea to throw in a nod to the baby Godzilla from the movies and all that in here. Only kill it off because everybody hated Minya, which is kind of funny. But so Ballinger, Dana, and Tony. Oh yeah, I already did that. But the broadcast finally gets turned on, and it hears the noises, and is wait, what? And heads off towards Alcatraz. So Daxton, he makes it back to base, where he slugs Heller and gets permission from this guy called General Kirby to take over the operation. Ballinger, Dana, and Tony are they're getting in the boat to get away from the island, but as they're pulling away, it gets caught on underwater cable just as Godzilla is getting to the island. So bad luck. In Daxton, he commandeers a special prototype helicopter and has a missile loaded into its front launcher. And he gives the gunner duty, which for some reason this helicopter has like 2 completely separated cabins in it, one for the pilot, one for the gunner. And there's just talk about how it's got a joystick and the aiming is so precise even a kid could do it. But he gives the job to his technical advisor, Digger O'Rourke. And then back on Alcatraz, Godzilla's smashing up the area, realizes that the baby isn't there, then fires a blast at the city which blows up some gas tanks. And the helicopter starts taking off, and O'Rourke drops a pack of gum, and he goes to pick it up and falls out of the helicopter like a dumbass. And as the explosion happens, Daxton pulls Kevin into the helicopter, to make him, to keep him safe. But after O'Rourke falls out, Daxton is forced to let Kevin, climb around to the rear and man the joystick controls. And also, meanwhile, back at Alcatraz, Godzilla has spotted the boat and starts dragging the cable it's caught on back to the island. And I swear it says that Tony jumps overboard here, only for him to be on the boat again later. But Dana is knocked out and trapped. She's pinned in place, so Ballinger stays on the boat to try and save her. And eventually, Ballinger, he leans over the side of the boat attempting to cut the cable, but Godzilla brings its claws down. And it looks like, Ballinger is gonna die, but then Godzilla gets distracted by the approaching helicopter, and Kevin manages to fire the missile down its throat. The helicopter banks sharply, and he falls into its claws as it dies. It saves him and softly brings him down to earth right before it dies, and he's kind of upset by this because he loves lizards and all that. And then the boat sails away with Ballinger and Dana together, and Daxton picks up the crying Kevin and they fly away. And the script ends on a shot of Godzilla's corpse as the sun rises behind it. Holy crap, this is going to be the shortest episode in the history of the podcast. But this script is, I think this is a pretty good, well-paced, exciting piece of work. I think it's not precisely Godzilla, namely in that Godzilla dies at the end. But once again, there are quite a few similarities to 85, like the nuclear satellite, the whole Cold War tension thing, firing a missile down Godzilla's throat from an experimental weapon, and that it was the Super X. Here it's this helicopter called Hornet, and it actually does kind of kill Godzilla for a bit until that nuke goes off and kind of brings it back. And also luring it out to an island to get rid of it, which is something that, with a special noise, which is something that they do in 85. And there's even a piercing death shriek from Godzilla at the end of this, which is in the American version of Godzilla 85. Once again, very interesting how these two kind of cross over. But I think if they would have made this would have been a pretty solid monster movie. But I'm also the guy who doesn't mind the Roland Emmerich movie. I mean, it's not really Godzilla, but as a monster movie, I can't honestly say I mind it all that much. It's not a brilliant Godzilla movie, but as a monster movie, I think it's okay. This, I think, would have been on the same sort of level. It would have been a bit better, mainly because it's a lot shorter and there's not as many characters running around, especially in this draft where they really streamlined it down to the bone. I really enjoyed this. I think for someone who had never seen a whole Godzilla movie, I think Fred Dekker did a very good job. And I just really like how relentlessly pacey this draft is. It moved really, really quickly from plot point to plot point. It didn't waste any time. It wasn't overcomplicated. It was a very simple monster movie, and it worked. The characters were simple, but they were decently written, and with some good actors, they would have done a good job. And overall, I just really enjoyed this script. I had a fun time reading it. Once again, not really Godzilla, but it's a good movie. So yeah, that's Godzilla King of the Monsters 3D. Basically, I gotta talk about why this didn't happen. So yeah, Steve Miner was getting all these people together. He made his deal with Toho. And he actually had this set up. He had William Stout working on it, and David Allen, who also would do the stop motion effects for Puppet Master, among other things. Rick Baker, contracted to make the full-size Godzilla head. You had Fred Dekker writing it, and they were looking at actors, but he was shopping this around to every studio, and he got offers from John Peters, but he didn't think it was enough money, so he turned it down. And in hindsight, Steve Miner said that was a mistake. And because he wasn't a huge name at the time, as Fred Dekker says, nobody wanted to give him this $25 to $30 million budget that he wanted, which in today's Hollywood is fucking, chump change. Nobody wanted to do it specifically because they didn't think spending that kind of money on what was viewed as a kid's movie was really worthwhile. And it's kind of a shame because I think this would have been an interesting American Godzilla movie to see in the early 80s. I think this is something that might have potentially done well if they had the budget. But, Steve Miner, eventually he couldn't get, anybody to say yes to it. He ran out of studios, and so he let Toho take the rights back, and they went and made Return of Godzilla, which really makes me wonder if Return of Godzilla or Godzilla 1985, it really makes me wonder if they read this script and went different bits out that they liked. So yeah, that's this script. I feel really bad about leaving this off at only 40 minutes, and, I'm going to have to edit this thing, and that's going to make it even shorter. Very good script, highly recommend it. I'm just going to give a closing preamble just to make this thing a few minutes longer. I'd say as a Godzilla fan, it's worth reading just to get an idea of what an American Godzilla movie in the 80s would have been and just how different Steve Miner's career might have turned out. I mean, he might not have had to direct Soul Man, and maybe we wouldn't have gotten that terrible Dawn of the Dead remake from him if he did this. And of course, he would later go on to do kind of a giant monster movie with Lake Placid, which is a film I enjoy a lot. And it has this same kind of feel to it with the characters in that, where they're not incredibly well defined, but they're performed really well, that they're memorable. And it had a bit of an ensemble and some conflict going on in it. Yeah, I can see the approach he took with, the characters and the acting in that and applying it to this. Yeah, I think he might have done a very good job of it. I do think he did a good job, presenting, Jason Voorhees as a completely unstoppable monster in Friday the 13th 3D. So it would have been cool to see him do something kind of like that a little bit with Godzilla. But yeah, I'm just going to just to pad this out a couple more minutes, because if I leave this off at anything less than, 42 or something like that, I'm going to feel really stupid. But once again, like I said, check us out on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. Check us out at iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Leave a review and a rating if you feel so inclined. And if you want to, if you really want to, you don't have to. This is just a purely optional thing. Go to patreon.com/screenplayarchaeology. And, donate what you feel like. There's no tiers or anything there yet, because I just put it together for the sake of putting it together. It's not a serious thing I'm doing. But yeah, if you want to donate whatever you feel like. If you feel like donating nothing, just continue listening to the episodes. That's fine by me. But do that. And also, I want to mention the bonfire campaigns again, because I feel really shit. I jumped the gun on those. I should have waited till I had an episode mostly in the works until I turned those campaigns on, but I fucked up. But I'm just going to mention them again. Bonfire.com/screenplay-archaeology-1. If you want the Hellraiser-based shirt about Pimphead, based on the Hellraiser 3 episode I did with Deus Deacon. Or you can go to bonfire.com/screenplay-archaeology-Muldoon if you want the maybe the Raptors moved Muldoon shirt based on the Jurassic Park 4 episode that I did with Shadow. So yeah, definitely check those out if you want to. I just want to make, I don't need to sell that many. I just want to make sure I sell 5 so I can at least get my shirt, just to prove that the campaign's not a total failure. So yeah, definitely make sure you check those out. Once again, it's completely optional. I understand if you don't want to, but I just, I want to encourage you to at least give it a look. But yeah, so yeah, do all that. Check out all the social media stuff. And until next time, which should be a longer episode, because I'm going to do a 3-episode sort of X-Men tribute thing. That's my plans for right now. For Dark Phoenix coming out, it's likely to be the last big screen hurrah for the main Team X-Men movies from Fox. And, whatever New Mutants ends up being, whenever that ends up coming out. But yeah, until the next episode, guys, bye.